you never learn anything in your life that's of importance without it having a pretty damn destabilizing effect on you at the moment of realization, right? You learn something happy, it's like, whatever. You know, all that means is that I was doing things right. Like, it's nice and everything, but it's not informative. You do something and all hell breaks loose. That'll make you think. That's for sure. You might never stop thinking for the rest of your life. So, anyways, the unknown. The unknown is that which surrounds the known. It's unexplored territory. It's usually represented as female, I think, for a variety of reasons. And not as female exactly. It's not the right way to think about it. As feminine. And that's not the same thing, because feminine is a symbolic category, whereas female is like an actual female. And so you don't want to confuse the metaphor with the actuality. Because we had these social cognitive categories built in, you know, you might say masculine, feminine, and offspring, something like that. We had to use what we could to represent what we were attempting to figure out, and we kind of mapped them onto the external realities of being the best we could, using what we could. And so, you know, nature is benevolent and it's fruitful. All things come from nature, and all things come from the unknown, right? Because the known is already there. It's the unknown that manifests the new, right? And so that's part of the reason for the characterization of the unknown as feminine. And then there's also the case that women play a massive role in sexual selection among human beings, so that from an evolutionary perspective, you're twice as likely to be a failure if you're a man than you are if you're a woman, in that you have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. And you think, well, that's impossible, but it's not. All you have to do is imagine that every woman has one child, half the men have two, and the other half have zero. And so, end of problem. And that's basically how it works out. So women are more choosy maters than men by a substantial margin. There was a funny study done by the guy who established, it was one of the big dating sites, and he looked at how women rated men, and they rated the 50th percentile man at the 15th percentile. So 85% of men were below average according to women's ratings. Now, men had their same arbitrary choices, because of course they preferred younger women to older women, and they were more swayed, I would say, by attractiveness, but that didn't have nearly as big an effect on their actual rating of women. So depressed people are sad and frustrated and disappointed. They tend to feel all negative emotions simultaneously in a manner that's paralyzing. You take the problem, I'm suffering, and then you think, well, why are you suffering? And then you can practice encountering the obstacles that are stopping you, and it'll make you braver, and it'll help you deal with your problems. Anyway, so, you know, from a Darwinian perspective, nature is that which selects. That's all it is. And so sexual selection plays a massive role in human evolution. You know, the fact that we have these massive brains is very likely a consequence of a positive feedback loop in sexual selection. You know, because otherwise that's the only time you can get really rapid changes in evolutionary space, where, you know, you get a process going that reinforces itself. So there's a little preference for intelligence, and then that produces more intelligent men and women, and then there's a little more preference for intelligence, and, you know, maybe then that turns into the ability to speak and or to master fire, and then there's way more selection for intelligence, and the brain just goes like this, you know, and women have paid a pretty big price for that, because your hips are basically so wide that you can barely run, and if they were any wider then you couldn't. And of course the pelvic passageway through which the baby travels is too small, so it's really painful and dangerous, and the baby's head has to compress quite a lot. I mean, they come out cone-shaped often, and then they're born really young, so you have to take care of them forever. Like, what the hell, you know, a deer is born, a fawn is born, and it's like 2 seconds later it's standing, and then it's running from a lion. It's like, you know, It's like 15 minutes later, and a baby, it's like, he just lies there and, you know, utters plaintive noises. That's all it can do. And it does that for like 10 months before it could skitter away from a sloth if it was predatory, you know. So you really got to take care of those creatures. And so that's a big price to pay. That's a big price to pay for our cortical evolution. So anyways, here's some of the symbolic representatives of the unknown. The unconscious Dionysian force of the id. So that's sort of Freud's representation of the unknown. The terrors of the darkness. That's the unknown. The monsters that lurk there. The source and the resting place of all things. The great mother, the queen, the matrix, which means matter, which means mother. The matriarch, matter, mother. The container, the cornucopia, the object to be fertilized, the source of all things, the fecund, the pregnant. The strange, the emotional, the foreigner, the place of return and rest, the deep, the valley, the cleft, the cave, hell, death, and the grave, because it's beyond the moon, ruler of the night and the mysterious dark, and matter and the earth. And you know all this because when you watch a movie that's rife with symbolic representations, it draws on those underlying metaphors, and they're natural. I mean, where does a witch live? Well, in a swamp, for God's sake. She doesn't live in the penthouse of a New York tower. She lives in a swamp, and it's dark there. And if the moon's up, that's a better. And maybe it could be a crescent moon, or maybe it could be a full moon. But, you know, witches live in the right place if you're going to understand it. And you understand all of that. And it's part of the structure of your imagination, you could say. And so it's part of the unspoken, fantastical imagination that unites all of us and that makes us specifically human. There's a good representation of the underworld and the place of transformation. So that's hell. I mean, Isis in Egypt was queen of the underworld, and the underworld generally has a queen, and she usually shows up when order falls apart. And so you go to the underworld when your life falls apart. That's what it means. And so when you see these stories of the hero, you know, journeying to unknown lands of terror and danger, that's what happens to you. It happens to you all the time. You know, you're in this little safe space like the Hobbit in the Shire, and then, you know, there's a great evil brewing somewhere, and you can no longer ignore it, so off you go into the land of terror and uncertainty. And better to go on purpose than accidentally, that's for sure, because at least you can be prepared. And we also know that if you're going to face a threat, if you face it voluntarily, what happens is your body activates itself for exploration and mastery. But if you face it involuntarily, same size threat, then you revert to prey mode, and you're frozen, and that's way more stressful. It's way harder on your body, and so it's better to keep your eye open and watch for emergent threats, because you all know, you know, what you're not doing quite right and where your life is likely to unravel. You all have a sense of that, and the best thing to do is to not ignore that, to pay attention to it, to watch it, and to take corrective action early, and then, you know, you stay on top of things, and things, your little trip to the underworld might be a few minutes long instead of a catastrophe that produces post-traumatic stress disorder, knocks you out for 4 or 5 years, and maybe you